Stockbridge Agricultural College, is that right? And is married to a beautiful woman of the Ojibwe tribe, Carol Lang Mills now, I guess. And the Ojibways range between the state of Wisconsin and the nation of Canada, is that the province of Ontario?
Well,
Up in that area. He has 3 beautiful children. The eldest is 13, Mashonakas, and the 8-year-old, Wamsikook. He's 12? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, Wamsikook is 12. And a daughter, Ikwe, who is 4. Years ago, maybe for 2 years or more, I seemed to always have Mashonakas and Wamsikook on Saturdays. I babysat for them quite a bit for one reason or another. And I like to tell Mr. Mills here and his wife that largely the reason they turned out to be such splendid children they were in my care and custody on Saturdays and sometimes on Sunday morning. Mr. Mills is quite a historian. He knows a great deal about the English settlements here and is almost as conversant, if not just as conversant, in white settlements and plantations here as he is in the history of his own people, of his own tribe, and of most of the tribes going up and down the East Coast. So I would like to introduce, without any further ado, Mr. Mills, Earl Mills Jr. Should we come up there, or do we need a microphone, or what?
It's usable. If you'd like to use it,
I
or you
think,
can pull it down.
I think I'll be fine without it.
Okay.
Can you hear Mrs. Fields?
If you can hear him, I suggest you move.
Yes, if you can't hear me, I'll move on a little bit. I'm going to speak a little bit about Santuit. Now, I guess this is actually the second village of Santuit here. Originally, apparently there was the village of Santuit was originally called Santuit, and at some point shortly after it was settled, the name was changed to Santuit. That, I guess we refer to that as Old Santuit. This is New Santuit or East Santuit. There's also another Santuit, or what's another Santuit, over at Provincetown. Provincetown, on Nantucket Island. There's a place called Santuit. Now it seems that the name Santuit, being anglicized as it is, there's it's somewhat unfair, at least to me, the actual translation of the original place. The place in Provincetown, on Nantucket, is Santuit seems to refer to a long neck of land, if you will. And that somewhat resembles the lay of this place, too, Santuit being a long neck of land. But in translating from Wampanoag dialect into English, there's always a lot of room to play around. There was a lot of thought process that went along with the words, often a story of some sort that went behind the name place. I've heard that this was called the long fields or the long meadows or that sort. Although the words in Wampanoag, meadow and fields, don't really fit into the word Santuit at all. But this land at one time was just that. This long neck of land was filled with cornfields. In the Wampanoag settlement, this being a very agricultural area, was employed as that. Now, when I was a young child in school and I read my history book, I always had in my mind this picture of this thick, dense, dark forest starting at the shore and extending all the way to the Pacific Ocean, or at least to the Great Plains. But actually, that wasn't the case, at least in this area here. These lands corn to somewhat provide enough sustenance for family to get through the year. So if you figure out that's a small family, so it's pretty safe to say that the vast area of this land was cleared for agricultural fields. The planting patterns was that every 3 to 5 years, the family would move their garden into an abandoned area. They would let it lie fallow for at least 3 to 5 years. So that would lead us to see that Santuit was a fairly open area when the English first came. In fact, the majority of early English settlers in this area settled in what were Wampanoag home sites. That is, there was a cleared area already ready there. They didn't come in like the pioneers in some parts of the country with axes and clear their lots out of the virgin forest. They simply moved into areas that had already been habitated, that had already been used agriculturally, and set up shop. More often than not, here in this area, in this part of Massachusetts, the original inhabitant population was gone due to disease. The late 1500s to early 1600s, there were several large plagues that took place here. In the 1500s, when there was a lot of plague problems in Europe, sailors or fishermen that were coming to fish the banks off of Cape Cod, if the seaman was sick, and it was determined that it was one of the terminal illnesses, he was brought in and put on shore. So my relatives would take him in and try to care for him. These diseases like smallpox, etc., were so deadly that whole villages died as a result of these people taking in these individuals. There was no tolerance at all to these diseases, and entire villages died over short periods of time. That left a lot of the land. Well, Plymouth Colony is a prime example. That whole village was gone. So when the Plymouth Colony, the Pilgrims came to Plymouth, they had a village of cleared fields and plots ready for them. You know, they attributed it to God and His salvation of providing them with an area. But diseases were the fact. In traditional Indian way of looking at the world, we believe that the Great Spirit gave us everything that we needed. We just needed to put a certain amount of energy into maintaining and taking care of those things that He provided for us. Everything was done on a very, very strictly managed plan. Okay? The Wampanoag people are a democratic society. So every midwinter, there's a special ceremony, it's a midwinter ceremony. And the tribes would come together, and it was decided which areas each family was going to be allocated to have their gardens, to have their summer homes. It was also decided where the hunting was to take place, which rivers, or which parts of which rivers each family would be allocated to fish. And so this whole area was under a management plan. If we look back and we see the area, there's talk of trees in this area that were so big that 4 or 5 men standing with their arms outstretched could encircle these trees. That is not to say that, that we had a philosophy that all trees should be left to grow to their natural state. Wood was used for canoes. Large chestnut trees were felled to make dugout canoes. And one of the reasons why we don't employ dugout canoes really these days is because of the chestnut blight that wiped out the chestnut trees. We have made a few pine dugout canoes, but they're really not blessed with a beautiful voice. And in the evenings, she would sit up on the hill and she would sing out into the forest, to the bay. And there was a giant trout that lived in Shoestring Bay. And he was like the chief of the trouts, or the leader of the trouts, a very large trout. And he heard her. Her voice was so beautiful that he was taken by her voice. He fell in love with her voice, not being able to see her way in land. So as time went on, he felt that he had to see her, he had to be with her, because his voice had so attracted him. So this trout made his way. He began at Shoestring Bay, and he began, as they do when they burrow out to lay their eggs in the nest, but he burrowed continuously. He made his way towards Santuit Pond. Upon reaching the pond, they, capitalized the story, they did get together, and they did leave something for the people. What they left was this river that is known for its trout, and that's how the Santuit River came to be. In fact, I think there's mention, there's trout, they call it Trout Brook Road, or there's mention made in some of the things. A lot of Indian history is mentioned in road names, Mashop stables, farms, because that's the area where Mashop last lived before he moved over to the island, where he finally disappeared from this area.
Excuse me, before the Pilgrims came, was Mashpee like the center of the Wampanoag Nation, or was it somewhere else?
Well, Mashpee was the center in this area. It was a center, not unlike the English villages with their church. The church was the center of the whole area. Well, in Mashpee, our church was a giant oak tree, a very large oak tree that stood until the 1950s on Bryant's Neck in Santuit Pond, which is maybe a half a mile from the junction of Route 130 and Santuit Road. This is Bryant's Neck. That was the spiritual center of our church. It was underneath that oak tree that the people would gather for their council meetings, special ceremonies, feasts, etc. It was on that spot where Richard Bourne first Christianized the Mashpee Indians. And it was there that the old Indian meeting house, which now stands on Route 28, it was built on that spot at Bryant's Neck. In the 1700s, it was relocated to its present location. See, they knew that, as in other religions in other parts of the world, in pagan parts of Europe, they always built their cathedrals at sites where the people went originally to have their pagan ceremonies. The same here. They knew that the Wampanoag people would always go to that spot, so they built a meeting house there. Once they had their attention, they come over to the other side. Over to where it is now was an old burial grounds. And then he just modernized it by employing headstones for all the newer burials. So people in this area technically would be part of that band. But the way the people lived, each clan would have an area where they lived, whether it was Santuit, Shimuit, all of the different areas. The clans would have their reign. So a clan would have this area, and the different family members of that clan, which might be 20 families or 20 households, would be sprinkled across this area. Kind of like a small village. But not in a village in the sense of the English where, it's neatly laid out. It was just spread according to the land, the agricultural land. So that it required a lot of space because the people salvaged off of the earth. Whether it was berries, berry picking, gathering acorns, which was another grain that was employed widely. Acorn cakes were made out of the white oak acorns. And when they were boiled and mashed and the powder was dry, that would be saved. And in the early spring until the beginning of the corn ripening season, the acorn flour would get them through that period of time when the corn ran out until the green corn came. It had a supply of grain. regrowth, and it discouraged the lower growth. We find that it also, they find today, by having these annual fires and creating a large amount of cloud cover or smoke cover, they seem to extend the growing season somewhat. Now, corn usually stood into the fields until Indian summer. So Indian summer is after the first frost. This Indian corn is tenderized by the frost. And so our feast in the fall, like Thanksgiving time, the corn that was eaten at those feasts was corn that was picked after the frost, so that it could be eaten without being pounded. It could be eaten as is. It was naturally tenderized. They say, one of the stories of Indian summer, they say, is that that's when the lazy Indians picked their corn. They kept putting it off, putting it off. Winter came, but then summer came back again, and they would pick their corn. That's the contemporary story of the birth. The older one talks about uses a coyote, and the coyote is trying to change and alter the seasons. And it takes away summer, then the Great Spirit brings it back.
How much ocean fishing can find?
We have a saying that we still say is Wampanoag Quahog. And fishing, shellfish was a large part of the diet. It was smoked and stored away for future use. Every community had a community smokehouse, as well as at each fishing camp, there would be places where the men smoked the fish. Smoking and drying was the principal method of preserving food. Quahogs and oysters were smoked and to some extent dried and used later on in the season when the people were unable to get it because of winter ice, etc. But also, as the seasons progressed, each species of fish was utilized and eaten in as large quantities as possible while it was fresh, but also large quantities were smoked and dried and stored to be put away for the rest of the year. That way, the diet being very varied, but you were also able to maintain all the necessary ingredients throughout the year. In some areas of Massachusetts, and more as you go up north, there were large shell heaps where communities would gather to shuck their shellfish. Early colonists used those shell piles for fertilizer. And there were literally mountains of sea clam, quahog shells, and clam shells that had accumulated over the long period of time that people had been here. Beginning in early spring, the men would go to the rivers, set up their fishing camps to fish for the herring, the shad, the smelts, and areas where there were salmon. That was the beginning of the Indian year. Indian New Year starts at the time when the fish start running. The women and the rest of the family would go to the garden areas and start preparing the soil for planting. So we had this system where they say that Indian women did all the work and men just sat around and smoked their pipes. But that's not really the case. In most of the Indian households, there was more than one wife. And that if a man married a woman, her sisters didn't marry, that man was responsible for all her sisters. They would become like his wife, not necessarily in a biblical sense, but they would be part of that family. And they would help with all the necessary work in having a family, that is, taking care of the garden, making baskets and other containers, to store food, making bags. Hemp bags were widely used to store the dried foods. Hemp, or dog-bane hemp, being a native plant. In fact, it was one of America's first exports, was dog-bane hemp. Rope. So that these family units, each family unit was somewhat self-sufficient. They had all the skills necessary that a young person learned all the skills, whether it was making their clothing, their moccasins, and their rest of their clothing, learning how to make baskets, bags, bows, arrows, etc. All the things necessary for survival. Most of the shell fishing was done by hand. That is, rigs weren't employed or just diggers and clam flash. As far as quahoging and oystering, that was all done hand and foot, as the weather permitted, so that there wasn't any speak of any winter quahogging or anything like that. Another big thing that was harvested in the local bays was eels. In fact, a lot of the place names that you have, Indian place names, refers to gathering of eels at a particular place. And eels also were gathered by hand and foot methods in the warm weather, but were speared in the winter in the mud, as many people still do today. And also were speared what they call weak wash, which is holding a torch at night in a boat, and the eels are attracted by the light and they're speared. That's something we've done that in your fishing days. It's not really done much today anymore. It's still done to some extent in Canada. I know I have Indian friends that still, they call it Santuit, that they still utilize that for gathering eels.
Were there two sizes of dugouts? Obviously, dugouts that are that you use the river would be hardly adequate to go out anywhere.
Right. There's the so-called war canoe, which would hold up to 20 men, would be utilized for ocean going. And then the smaller type of canoe, which is a flatter canoe, there's one on Great Neck Road that was made by Mr. Norman Peters. It's a flat type of canoe with a rounded bottom. And that's utilized on the inland waterways, whereas in the open, the more traditional canoe style that most of you are familiar with was utilized on the open ocean. Up until contemporary times, Wampanoag people hunted and ate whale. In fact, they say that when a whale washed up on the beach, they attribute that to Mashop. Mashop, cultural hero, was known to wade out into the ocean and grab whales by the tail, throw them over his shoulder, and bring them home to roast up. In fact, where he last lived on Gay Head, right up at the top of the Gay Head cliffs there, they say he used to roast whole whales. And archaeologists have uncovered among the ashes and embers under there whale bones that were put from that fire. But the people didn't eat whale, and when a whale did wash up, or when Mashop did leave a whale on the beach, the whole community would go down and butcher the whale up, divide up the meat, and preserve some of the meat for future use by drying and smoking. As far as so all of the species of fish that we are familiar with and more were utilized by the people.
Deer provide clothing?
Deer, like I said, deer is the principal source of clothing. Deer hide made the best legging. It's lightweight, it's easy to work. Deer is deer is to Indian people was what beef is to America. And the deer herds were always very plentiful. It's still fairly plentiful in Nashville. One of the reasons for burning the underbrush also was that young suckling growth that grows back after a fire is what the deer like the best. So by burning the underbrush, they not only made it easier to hunt the area, but they encouraged the growth for the feed for their wild livestock, if you will. I mean, when the English first came and brought their animals, the comment made by the local inhabitants was that it made no sense to utilize all that energy to raising your meat when you could just, the Great Spirit had already done all that work for you by putting the deer in the forest, and all his food grows wild. So that it took a long time for Indian people to get used to the idea of raising livestock. Venison tastes just as good as anything else. It requires only the labor of harvesting and butchering it. as well as deer. The other meats that many of us still eat are raccoons, all of the quadrupeds except for fox. To my knowledge, my people eat. One of the delicacies of Mashpee, maybe not so much in the last generation or two, is skunk, which is harvested by hitting them on the head, and the hair is singed off, and they say it's put up much the same way as pork, where the skin is on like the rind of a ham. They were also dried and preserved for future use. But the fat in the skunk was a highly prized item that was used for medicine right up until modern times here, my father's day. That skunk grease is used for keeping away colds. Like the way they use Vicks today, that skunk grease was used the same way. I mean, skunk grease, it's just grease. It's not, it doesn't smell like skunk any more than cow fat or lard. It smells like a cow. But it does have certain properties that make it medicinal, that it took away chest congestion. We always had it on the back of the stove in the old days in Mashpee, where you told the kids every time you walk by, take a spoonful. It also mixed it with molasses, make it a little more palatable. That helped keep away those kind of winter.
Did the people have a way to prevent the skunk from smelling or contaminating
Not
meat with the other two?
from contaminating meat.
Yeah, with the odor. The odor is spray.
No, because that spray is all external. I mean, once you cinch the hair off, there's no remnants. What they call the scent gland, they call it the kernels. They're inside of the back end there. And those are taken out, and it's just a series of glands.
Yeah, I knew about that as a child.
Yeah, they had no. In fact, they say one of my older cousins was telling me that sometimes the old folk, the real old people, when he was a little kid, would put those glands into that skunk grease to kind of enhance that medicine. He had never partaken of it himself. He said he got it as far as here, and he couldn't do that. But I don't know if he was joshing me or what.
No, I'm very serious about
Yeah.
that. When I was a child, I remember the kid down the street claimed that if you kept the skunk off the ground,
That's right.
he couldn't spray you. So
That's
you
right.
catch the skunk by the tail and lift him up and swallow it.
Yes.
Can't give you any odor.
The skunk was hunted generally by pairs. One person would attract the skunk's attention. The other one comes up behind him and grabs him up off the ground.
You know how to do that.
My grandfather, Ferdinand, who Paul knew, used to take the young people from Mashpee out skunk hunting a lot. I was always too young to do that. But he had been straight before. The only method he had for getting rid of smell was to bury clothes.
Yeah.
And, stay away from people for most days. It does wear off.
While you're talking about the husbandry of the English and melding into the cohogs, could you speak about the great complaint that the Indians always brought to the governors of Plymouth about the cohog there?
Yeah, one of the things we're talking about employing the shellfish was that a lot of the English in this area generally had pigs for one of their livestock, and they would let the pigs roam in the summer out on the clam flats. The pigs would like to root as they do into the bay and eat some of that marsh root, which is very tender and sweet. In fact, it is very good to eat. The cattail roots, etc., make a very nice, tasty root. The people complained to the colony that pigs were destroying the clam flats. That the pigs were just, in the heat. The farmers would let their pigs go into the mud of the flats, and all that rooting destroyed a lot of the clams. And that, to the local native inhabitants, that was a problem because they were ruining clam flats for some time. Once you destroyed all the seeds, it takes a long time for those clam flats to come back. And so that was one of the points of contention between the Indians and the English was saw no problem with it, but of course the Indians, who depended upon those plants for sustenance, saw it as a big problem. It was one of the points of contention. There were many points of contention between the Indians and the English because of different lifestyles. That was one that was talked about a lot in the early history books. Yes.
Well, speaking about animals, would you comment about wolves, which were very common here, and rattlesnakes, and what did the Indians do about poison ivy? If you could comment on those.
Well, to start with wolves, each tribe or nation has what they call a totem. In the Indian language, it's tutum. And the totem means spiritual ally. And for the Wampanoag people, or as we were formerly called, the Pokanoket people, the wolf is our totem. And the animal that you adopt as your totem, there are certain qualities of that you try to live up to. The wolf being a very social creature, you'd always, they take care of each other within their pack. They respect authority, but they're not afraid to challenge the authority of their leaders, to make sure that the leaders toe up to their responsibilities. Wolves, by and large, are not a threat to people. Most of the stories we hear about wolves are the old Aesop fable type, where the child and the wolf, like that. But my mother-in-law, who was raised in the bush country of Ontario, lived in encountering wolves, and I had never ever heard of the story among the Indian people of people being attacked by wolves. The main enemy of the wolf is the shepherd and livestock keeper. That's where the wolf in Europe got its bad name, because of livestock, not because of any threat to man. In fact, for hunting people, the wolf is the best thing you could ask for, because it helps to maintain animal herds in a healthy state. It weeds out the sick, the old, or the infirm. And that's one of the jobs of the wolf in the greater plan, as we see what the Great Spirit has laid out for people. As far as rattlesnakes were eaten. The only story I know, that they say that if a rattlesnake crossed in front of you on a path, it meant bad luck. It meant that something was going to happen to you. Not that you were going to get bitten or anything, but that some greater event was going to take place. And they say that Mohammed Khan, or King Philip, as he was known by the English, say shortly before he died at Montauk, that a rattlesnake crossed in front of him, and he knew that his time was come.
How did they take care of it if they got bitten from a rattle? Was there any?
Medicine, among the Indian people, medicine was not so much more today. It was very high art or science. In fact, modern medicine owes a lot to the Indian people as far as the pharmacopoeia. They say that for every malady that the Great Spirit put upon the earth, nearby he also put the cure for that. Such things as poison ivy. You find that we use sweet fern or jewelry, which grows in fairly close proximity to that. Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, what would you use for poison ivy?
Many people still use it.
When I was a kid, that was one of the remedies. We'd go out and get a sweet fern and make a tea out of it. And also jewelry. Put that on, and I never found it.
Can't beat it. I mean, my wife gets poison ivy pretty bad sometimes, so I'll fill up the bath with it.
With what?
Sweet fern.
Oh, sweet fern.
And also jewel. Like I say, that's the, they say that for every, the Great Spirit didn't mean for anybody to be harmed in life. That's why for every malady, Poison ivy grows everywhere. One big. A tea for the poison ivy is applied topically. One of my good brothers always says that a good cure for poison ivy is to eat some of it. Now, when I was a child, I used to get poison ivy as a young child. One day, I wanted to prove to my friends that I didn't get it, which of course I did. So I took it and I rubbed it all over my whole body. And that was the last time, that was over 30 years ago. I can gather it out, I pick it, I pull it out of people's gardens. It has never bothered me since. So I somewhat go along with that idea. But that's...
Oh, that's right. I wouldn't want to prolong it, but can you describe the sweet fern? I had a plant called sweet flag.
Sweet, that's another medicine.
That's another medicine.
That's a more powerful Indian medicine that's used widely among many Indian people, the sweet flag. But sweet fern grows everywhere. It's a fern-like leaf that grows in a small shrub about this high. It's fairly pretty. It's got a very sweet, pungent odor. Even after the leaves have fallen off, when you hunt in those areas, you step in those dried sweet fern leaves. It smells sweet, pungent. Excuse me? It's not a true fern, it has a fern-shaped leaf, I guess. That's what I call it.
One that we also call spicy fern.
I don't know. I've only ever heard it called sweet fern. We use it for a lot of other things as well as that.
What are some of the other herbs that were used in this area?
Well, almost everything. Almost everything. Sweet flag. Used for almost like a cure-all, but cloves, I guess, that's a powerful one that we still employ today. Among the medicines that the people utilized, there was a male birth control that was made out of Solomon seal and Jack in the pulpit. And that was utilized by men to temporarily sterilize them so that birth control is nothing new. In fact, it's very old. Problem, a lot of the directions for making these medicines is lost among the people. And all of these plants that are really good medicines are also poisonous, toxic. So that it can only be used by somebody that knows what they're doing. Just like today's modern medicine, a pharmacist is really needed. And for those Indian medicines, midwife or what we call medicine woman or medicine man, we really need to be one utilizing it. We in our families use many herbs. I maybe use a dozen herbs for whatever it is that we need, whether it's for fever or kind of things that we run across in our daily lives. But for something more serious, we could go into a professional for that. A lot of that is lost on my own. Question? So among the type of land management things, and we're talking with Paul, is that seagull eggs was one of the things that we gathered, as well as turtle eggs. Any of the animals that lay eggs, those eggs were utilized. Turtle eggs are very strong flavored eggs, but
were there any sea-going turtles that would lay eggs into it?
I don't know about that. The turtle eggs that we employ are snapping turtles.
Right.
Those eggs are fairly easy to come across today. You can beat the foxes and the raccoons. And of course, like I say that. But the whole idea is that these things are done in under a managed way. As my cousin Ted always says, don't take them all. He says that when we're heading fishing, you know, is that you have to always remember to leave some. And also that they call the golden Indian rule is to always put back into the earth what you take out of it. You know, whether that's just a prayer, you know, in an offering, or even a tiny offering of something, you know. Whenever we take something out of the earth, whether it's for our food or for our use, we always put something back in. Just to, you know, the circle being kind of the universal Indian symbol. Is that whatever you put out will come back to you. You know. And, so we always try to keep that cycle or that circle going by as we take, we give like that.
What do you do to get rid of raccoons?
Put on some potatoes, I guess, and some cornmeal dumplings, and raccoons be in that pot before you know it. I mean, those kind of problems, we don't have much work, you know, in my little area there. Raccoon is another very popular staple in the fall. It's a pastime, but it's also, you know, whenever we have a large get-together, you can count on raccoon being there. It's one of the meats. And that raccoon fat is another thing that's investing, you'll ever use on your leather shoes. It beats the heck out of leek oil or any of those things you buy over the counter. I have friends that used to sell that raccoon grease to trappers for their foods.
Would you roast meat?
Raccoon, well, we parboil and roast it, yes. Parboil to tenderize it. And we roast
How do
it.
you get them?
How do we get them?
Yeah.
Today?
Yeah.
Well, today a lot of the guys have coon hounds, chasing coon hounds, dogs, or trapping. Trapping would be the old time method. Although people did employ dogs, not so much for hunting as for animals of prey, like that. But today we mainly use dogs and raccoon.
What kind of traps did you use? You didn't have steel lake traps?
No steel lake traps, but just as, or far more deadly, were things such as deadfall traps, which are made of, you know, a series of logs that are lashed together, heavy weights on top, so that it technically, you know, you kind of lay it out so that it's going to come across the front part of the animal, so that you don't ruin the meat. You know, the meat and the fur being two things that you're after. You're not after eliminating the animal as much as procuring goods from it. Snare traps were very popular and used for all animals. Snare traps are used for everything from deer down to rabbits. In fact, I think some of the early settlers got caught up in some of those deer snare traps. You know, both the leg hold and the neck hold snare traps are used for deer, where you know, take them out on it. You bend over a saddle and it will take you up. I know there are early stories. Winslow writes about people getting caught in some of those traps. Those were set everywhere on the runs that the trappers set. Of course, in the contemporary times, people used the gauge wire in the 20th century. But prior to that, cordage was used. Cordage was made out of a number of materials, not only the dog being hemp, but the bark from the linden or basswood tree made a very fine cord, as well as, let's see, out of the dog bean's cousin, milkweed plant or briar root is used for some of these snare lines. The bullbriar, green bullbriar with a long white tuberous root that is very good for tying and lashing things together. Also out of the several other plants that we use, as well as hair roots are not that common. rest of the portion, the families would go out there and gather the eggs. Again, taking, say, 2 out of the 3 or as they felt necessary so that the birds could continue on. There's a certain mortality of young anyways. Right? So they just kind of play into that game of survival. And then each year that pattern was rotated so that the supply of birds was always there, but also that people had a constant supply of eggs. That way, in that management style, people could gather there for theoretically forever, as long as the natural resource existed. And that was the idea behind the management plan. The only thing that ruined this plan was coming of the English and threw everything into a disarray. Although when the English did come and land transactions took place, from the Indian point of view, it was understood that hunting access and access to the points beyond those lands that were deeded over to English was still maintained. Understanding that, if you lived over at the edge of the bay, well, we were still going to eat the clams from the other side of this land that was conveyed to you. Just as we're here in a coastal place, you're going to go across. The whole idea of land ownership was something that was real popular in English common law, but really not understood at all by Indian common law. And it's always understood that nobody could physically own land. We only use it for the time that we're here. And the only exclusive right that we had was within our own zones. That we want. Beyond that, within our territory certainly, but private land ownership is something that was very foreign to the Wampanoags.
You live in Wigwam's not Wickiups.
Wickiup is not a local word. I think, to my best knowledge, Apaches lived in Wickiups, and that's quite a distance from here. Wigwam, which means home. The word for house is witu. Wigwam is an Algonquin word used by most of the tribes in the east, or the greater part of the east coast of North America. And they say that means home. We lived in dome-shaped witus, and also in longhouses, or we say Quonset hut, which most people are familiar with. The style of the Quonset hut was first seen down among the Narragansetts. It was a longhouse down at Quonset Point. And that's the style of longhouse. That shape was the shape of the longhouse of the Wampanoag people here. They were bark-covered houses that were lined on the inside with bulrush mats, and the outside with cattail mats. And over that was bark that made the house fairly permanent. The matting, the cattail mat, when it rains, the cattail swells up and it makes a waterproof barrier. And between the 2 layers it creates a dead air space that insulates the home as well. Also in humid conditions, the dried bulrush mat on the inside absorbs some moisture out of the air. So it's really kind of an ideal home, except for the fact that there's no TV or radio inside. In fact, right up until the 1800s, there were people imagined living in wigwams. My grandfather, who was born in about 1886 or so, remembers as a young boy there were still being wigwams up on by a national pond in the area that we call 12 acres, where today it's called Wampanoag Park. But up in that area, if you recall, as a young boy, there was the remains of wigwam frames up in that area.
There was a Scotsman who came to live in Nashville. I think he was a crewman from a boat in New Bedford or something. And he was quite fond of the whole thing and was living in such, well, that was his home in the 1860s and
the English way, the civilized way, as it were. Because, there were many people, the Irish weren't that far removed from the wigwam life. They were considered wild men as much as Indian people here. And, many Europeans were living basically in a tribal state, not long before the English came here. In fact, they say that many of the English soldiers that fought at the Pequot War in 1630, many of those same soldiers were fought in campaigns against the Irish in Ireland, trying to civilize them. Succeeded.
What about the land that Freedom Hall is on and right around here? Is there a story about this being a common place, a place where your people had landings? Did I read that from Newfound?
Not from me.
No, from Newfound.
Convicts would probably, it's quite possible, we're certainly located in a good spot for that. All materials being easily at hand. Many of the common areas or the common grounds stayed in that state, into contemporary times. I don't have any knowledge of that specific.
What about the churchyard down where there are both English names and Indian names on the tombstones? After Mr. Warren's arrival, are both the English and Indians buried in that churchyard, or are they the English names taken by some Indians?
English names taken by Indians.
Indians.
Or that same thing. There was, because there was a time, especially after, after most of the wars, Indian people have always been fond of fighting against, and always enlisted, actively enlisted in any of the wars that took place in this country. Right from the beginning, where even in the Pequot War, the first war here, 1630, there was Indians that enlisted with the English against the Pequots because they had some scores to settle with the Pequots. But after that first war, a lot of people were shocked and dismayed at the type of war that took place. War not being unknown, but wars of annihilation, etc. But even in King Philip's War, they were Wampanoags that fought with the English, led them to where King Philip of Wampanoag was living. The Great Swamp Massacre that happened to start the war was a secret encampment down at North Island, and no English knew how to get in. And there was an Indian that led them into that camp. In fact, that Great Swamp was theoretically is the largest massacre that ever took place between the Europeans and Indians, or Americans and Indians, as it is now. Without an Indian, that massacre never would have taken place. So we always say that we are worse than we are.
It should also be pointed out that many families that settled here of English descent, sooner or later, several people married Wampanoag people. The Sturgises, Constable, the Burses of Hyannis and Centerville, Nathaniel Doane Snow Burse was his great-great-grandfather, I believe, and he came from Hyannis. Sarah Adequin Sturgis, who was also related to you, Adequin, married a man from the Sandwich Barnstable line named Sturgis. There was a Goodspeed family that married a Wampanoag family. In fact, Mr. Pells, who lives down here, his wife was of a Wampanoag and an English family. Goodspeed, her maiden name was Goodspeed. Her mother was a Wampanoag. which could be anglicized C-O-W-E-T-T. I think it's, is it really C-O-U-E-T-T?
Well, I mean,
Who knows? It's an
we never had original
It's spelling like that. Cowlet, Attiquan, Hawknet, and so on and so forth.
When your bullets, what were your bullets made out of?
Ash and hickory.
Well, there's never single pair of that.
Single, right.
And they're reasonably short.
Longbows as well as
They weren't like the planes anymore.
no. There's different meanings.
Yeah.
Longbow was the favorite boy, I guess. Yes?
Do you remember, this was years ago, the story about the kettle in the hole?
Right.
There used to be private down there that you come in from Spring Street.
Yes.
You know that story?
Well, other than the fact that the land was conveyed from the Wampanoag people to the English for the price of a kettle and a hoe.
It was there for a long time, actually.
And
Is it still there?
that's not unlike Manhattan for a chest full of so-called trinkets. Those in an economy where the working of metal doesn't exist, a metal hoe and a brass kettle or metal are very valuable. And people often speak to me about how Indians were taking advantage of many of these trades. But that's only from one perspective. Indian people thought maybe that they may have been a little too steep with some of the English in some of these trades too. Because after all, the Indian idea wasn't that they were trading this land away out of their control. I mean, any more than, if a Russian national came to Santuit and bought a piece of land, your idea isn't that this land now belongs to the Tsar or to whoever's in charge of Russia. It's that you sold it to him, it's still within your domain. Well, the same happened for Indian people when they traded land away. They didn't trade the land away with the idea that this is now crown land belonging to the colony, etc. It's still Wampanoag land, it's territory. You're going to live on it. When you die, it will go back into the great common land of the nation. So there was things that took place that certainly the people couldn't see way down around the corner what was going on there. Perhaps the handwriting was on the wall. Beyond that, people had no idea.
And the biggest dig that's been done on the Santuit Peninsula, Baxter Neck, goes back 5,000 years. The archaeologist's report says that the majority of the material is summer sites, and their speculation was that the winter sites were elsewhere, that they came down to the shore for the shellfish. And I'm wondering whether that speculation is mistaken based on their assumptions about the diet of bear bones or whatever they thought the Indians ate during the winter, or whether there was a different winter site.
There is a winter-summer seasonal pattern, yes. Many of the longhouse structures were used as winter camps. And they were inland away from the coast, yes. Those were in the areas that where the hunting was perhaps better, there was a broader diversity of animals. That's not to say that all the people who decide to the east, many of them fly south, but there's a few that stick around. But for the Indians, it was the same way. Many of the encampments were inland towards Lakeville, place in wintertime in these large cabins where there's, there was a large group of people together. The elder, the wiser elder people would tutor the young people on history, certainly not the reading or the writing, but the arithmetic and all the things necessary to bolster the young minds.
Did they make pottery? Did they make pots out of clay and bar?
Yes. As soon as the English came, most of pottery use was abandoned because the quality of clay in this area is not very good. The degree of very often when using these pots, they would break. One thing that was very valuable to the old-time Indian people was the soapstone bowls, pots, because they would be passed down from generation to generation. Those are soapstone is locally quarried, not on Cape Cod, but within days run. Was used not only for heat-proof containers, but also for pipes, for smoking. Smoking tobacco is a very favorite pastime of Wampanoag people. And soapstone and clay pipes were utilized. In fact, the clay pipe was very popular with the English for many years, until my great-grandmother's time. Many of them still smoked small clay pipes. That was the old time Indian way. Many of the old women smoked pipes. A lot of smoking was done by the older people, and depending on what they generally didn't smoke straight tobacco either. They generally smoked a mixture of tobacco or with other herbs, what they call canoeing. That simply means a mixture. Tobacco is just one of the ingredients. The other ingredients gave it flavor and a mildness. But none of that smoking was ever mind-altering materials. People often joke with me about it. The pipe was used socially, and also the stone pipe is considered, in our spiritual way of life, it's considered like the Bible is to the Christians, or the pipe is to the Indian people. And the ingredients that we smoke, and the way they would use it is very sacred and special, and it's something that we still today take very serious.
Are they still Indian medicine men moving around to practice it?
Excuse me?
Are they still the medicine men or women around to practice what kind of medicine?
Yes, I guess you could say in a relative way. Very often, for the medicine people, it's something that's, we say that it's inborn, that you're born with certain gifts, and that's through your family line. So very often those practices and uses are passed down through a particular family. And one of our elders passed on not so long ago, it seems that her nieces still carry on to some extent the type of healings that she did, as well as one of the medicine man as well. Yes, we still have them. It seems that they're not as busy as they used to be.
How would it find food you
That's hard to say. Generally, people are kind of clannish, if you will, and especially today because there's a proliferation of interesting Indian spiritual and medicinal ways today, and to some extent there's some abuses of that. And, so while it was underground technically for a couple hundred years, it's still somewhat habited. some gatherings, if you may, like at some of the powwows, you might be directed towards somebody that has this medicinal knowledge. I know a man who travels to a lot of the powwows, goes by the name of Ted, or Ted Thundercloud. He's fairly outspoken about things that he wants, sharing with people.
Mr. Mills, on the Cape, there's a lot of stone monoliths that are around, or just groupings of stone.
Some parts of the Cape.
Yeah, are there any in Santuit that you're aware of, or any?
There's not that much stone in this area. And this is part of the belly here of the Cape. You don't find, one of the things that people here used to use was brush piles. When you go by certain places, you would throw a stick on this pile. And they were located all over. In the 50s, I guess most of them were destroyed because of the rash of forest fires that took place in the Cape here. I guess people felt that these old brush piles posed fire hazards. And, these kind of represented the same types of things as those monoliths that were utilized in the same way.
Were there any, do you know where the location that any of the brush piles were, or why?
They're located at junctions like at the crossing of Mashpee River. There was one. There's one down below where the meeting house is along the highway there, just off to the right of the highway. There used to be a real big one down by Walkway Bay. I'm not sure this area up here. There are others that know a little bit more about that.
The Wampanoag, the only ones on the Cape.
Well, that's open for conjecture because we weren't even called Wampanoag or Wampanoag until the 1700s. We were known as Mashpees or etc. And the term Wampanoag which just means people of the East. There are similar terms that are used in Canada and in other areas. They're only used in the general sense. It's my understanding that it wasn't until after the King Philip's War that it was really used here because the Indian nation was in such a state of destruction, if you will, that kind of to distance ourselves from that war, this agony, people started going by the more general term of Wampanoag, which just means peaceful people
Maybe it's a little off the track, but if the Indians here wanted to travel or fish on Cape Cod Bay, could they leave the small canoes as well as the big ones?
Well, I've been all over the northeast coast here in an 18-foot canoe. That's plenty big enough to go anywhere that I would want to go. Like I say, I've been all over the northeast here and the Atlantic, and certainly it's a nice ride on Cape Cod Bay.
Did you use sails? Were you okay?
Sails were employed. I haven't used sails. Some of my buddies have. But generally, you go out into the wind so that when you're done fishing, you can ride the wind back. That was the traditional method that was used. Yes.
And what would they use for sail?
Generally deerskin.
I think that you might be interested in knowing that Mr. Mills, prior to his becoming 40, probably about 20 years ago, canoed from Boston to New Brunswick in the ocean with friends. We went coal-hogging in that canoe a week ago Thursday in Nashville. It's still going strong.
Yeah, it's got a few cracked ribs, but
Those are
it's a wood and canvas canoe. And the design of the canoe is such that I feel safer in a canoe than I do in some of the boats that I've been in. Honestly.
I heard a story that during the Revolution, many of the Nashville Indians joined forces and fought the English, and that when it came time to harvest, there weren't enough men left, and they asked the Governor's Council to send some men down here to help with the harvest, and they sent some prisoners of war, veteran soldiers, and a couple of blacks, I believe, and that they came down and harvested and stayed and married. Is that true?
That's true, yes. During the Revolutionary War, the Mashpee community had one of the highest per capita losses of men. One of the highest in the Northeast. So there are people that trace their lineage back to some of these men that came down to help with the harvest.
And some of the surnames
still there.
are still here.
DeGrasse, Hendricks, Hirsch. There aren't any Hirsches now, but there were. There's some in Bournemouth still living, which in some cases was anglicized to Hush. And is it Weber? Weber? Weber, right?
Then you're trying to trace that.
Your father was named. Your father has a photograph of a man named Weber. And I think it was Weber, W-E-B-E-R, but it was still. There's an interesting story about the Quepish, about the Webfish family, and I've never seen it verified, but that there was a woman named Weber or Weber, a Mashpee Wampanoag woman, who descended from a Hessian mercenary prisoner of war named Weber. And she fell in love with a man of the Quepish family, Q-U-E-P-P-I-S-H. And the Webers didn't like the Quepishers, and the Quepishers didn't care too much for Webers. And so there was this Romeo and Juliet scenario, and the Weber girl and the Quepish man decided they didn't like either family too much, so they were going to run off, stay in Nashville, and marry. And the name Webfish came out of Weber and Quepish.
It's older than that. It was back in 1700.
It's old. Webfish is older than Weber or Quepish.
Right here, do it.
There's a separate Quepish name, however, that is extant. Q-U-E-P-P-I-S-H.
Every Quepish is probably the last to carry their surname, but there was also a station at Menominee named Quepish back at the time of first line.
So that's a fanciful story, Jim.
Does anybody know the names of those? Does anybody know definitely the names of all the men that came down here to help with that harvest and stayed?
No, I don't know their first names, but it's on record in the town of Sandwich.
Their last names.
It's on record in the town of Sandwich. See, because Mashpee files, births, deaths, and marriages were recorded in the Sandwich Town Hall. Because all that time it was not a town. It was a district or a plantation given over to the exclusive use of people of native Aboriginal descent.
Going back to the name of Webfish, the new Webfish, the Wicked Island in Austin Onset was a big
Yes.
editorial in the paper.
Right, at Wickett's Island in Austin, Onset Harbor was an island that goes back to the Wickett's family. That title apparently still never been clear, and some people try to use that Indian title to keep it from being developed. And I think that is still in the air. Or
rang up, knowing that the Wampanoags until the 20s separated that island into thirds. And one year would take seagull eggs, then the next year would, leave that and take them from the third in a pie shape there. So I called them audible and well-pleased, and I said, why don't you destroy a reasonable number of those seagull eggs, because they're taking over everything. Nobody can shellfish there because of the fecal coliform of the seagulls. Well, he said, I'm somewhat hesitant to send the rangers into all that poison ivy.